to Chew the Chat podcast.
Well, in that case, we shall begin, Persia. I'm going to introduce you to the show. Dr. Persia Jamshidi, am I saying that correctly?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
You're a classically trained scientist with a master's degree in genetics. You have a PhD in molecular biology, and as a cancer researcher being your main point of work, but you've sort of started to move towards masculinity, and you're obviously the founder of the Positive Masculinity Academy, which is how I came across you and found that fascinating. And that's why I wanted to get you on Chew the Chat and talk to you today about your journey through the academic world, your journey in your family, your journey in life, and where we stand with your work now. And, you know, where does that lead you in the future? And more importantly, where does it lead men, and how can it help us in the current climate?
Wonderful. So basically, and overall, I grew up in a non-religious family, which allowed me to form my own perspective of life and a lot less indoctrination than I would have. And I very much am appreciative of that to my parents. I was also raised by a father who is very old school, but definitely a feminist. But if you call him a feminist, he will not accept it, because that is, to him, he doesn't need a label to respect women. He is very secure. That's what I came out later in my research to find out what a real alpha male is, as opposed to the stereotype. Is basically a very secure man who was not threatened by women, and that not an alpha, but is a feminist man. This is just a man who's not threatened by women, and not only he does not discourage women, he encourages them to overcome whatever obstacles the society puts in front of them. So my dad always told me that you're better than boys. There was a time as a child, I thought I could actually even physically take on a boy who was much taller than me, because it just, in my mind, didn't connect that he's taller, he's bigger, he has bigger muscles. I just didn't have that inhibition that there's something that he can do that I can't. So that was very freeing in that aspect, upbringing, and I very much appreciate that. I was never told there is something that I should be doing as a woman. I was told I can do whatever I want to. It's my choice, or there is something that men can do and I can't. And so I didn't have those restrictions. I didn't have the religious restrictions. So I was able to always feel free to be who I am. And that was very helpful in being able to view other people as who they are. But I went to undergrad biology. My dad is a surgeon, so it was very natural for me. I liked it. I like biology. It was very natural for me to go that route. Master's genetics, biology, PhD, 7 years of 18-hour days. And in 2016, just out of personal curiosity, I started reading about men and why do I personally have so much problem understanding men. And the curiosity in reading I came across statistics that were specific to men in America. And then I checked in Europe and other places. The statistics are pretty similar. that men have such a high suicide rate. In society, we are always told men are the privileged gender. They have better jobs, they have better opportunities than they do. So why such a high suicide rate? If you're so privileged, and you are, why is your privilege not saving you? Why isn't your privilege not allowing you to enjoy life to the point that you don't feel compelled to end it? And that just didn't make sense. So I looked around, and in every country in the world, men have about 85% of all suicide rate except China, which I don't know why. That would require moving to China and doing a very thorough cultural study. But the rest of the world is the same. And then I realized that the homelessness is higher for men. In America, the rate of suicide for white men, for Native American men is the highest, but then the second highest is white men. And so when it comes to race, white men are considered the most privileged in the United States. So why they have the second highest suicide rate? It just does not make sense to me. So it turned from a personal curiosity, something personal that I wanted to find out just for my benefit, into a bigger curiosity, delving into data, start talking to men. And after a while, I developed a questionnaire. And a few men that I had talked to, they would send their buddies or their brother or their cousin to talk to me, and they wouldn't tell them why. They would just go talk to her, and they wouldn't really say more. And that just led one thing to another, and there was such a huge demand to talk to me, and I would ask them to sign a release for research because I'm not a therapist. I just want to make that very clear. And the demand to just open up, contacting me to open up, was surprising. So it became a side project, and I started actually designing a research project. Although I'm a cancer scientist, but I know how to do research, and the fundamental of how to design a research project is the same. You just, instead of plugging in cancer data, you plug in some other kind of data. So it turned into something so big and I got so much positive feedback, and so much need was felt, that everybody told me men don't open up, men don't talk. That is not my experience. If a man finds a safe space, men are extremely sensitive and intuitive, knowing that whether the person they're talking to is safe or not. If they feel an ounce of judgment in any way, shape, or form, they will not share anything. But if they feel that they're talking to a safe person, in my experience, speaking now in the past 4 years to over 60,000 men globally, it's like a dam waiting to break open. And after a while, I realized that this is something that I can do even better than cancer research. And as dedicated as I was to cancer, there are plenty of other colleagues who are doing a fantastic job. But this is something I have not seen at the scale and the way that I'm doing. And I believe that there's a lot of work to be done, and I just couldn't put it down. So that's a summation of what I'm for.
The questionnaire I obviously, in researching you myself and reading your work, I filled in the survey on your site as well. I think I did it just today, and I found it really quite intriguing. It's reasonably in depth. There's a lot of questions in there, and they're broken down into categories. So what are the categories on there, Persia, for everybody listening?
There are a lot of understanding of A lot of questions about who do you think you are as a man? Is your understanding of your masculinity what society told you and groomed you? Unfortunately, that is the correct way of saying it. Or do you know your natural masculine identity without any of the indoctrination? Because what people love to do to teenage boys is tell them how to be a man. That is, teenage boys are bombarded by all kinds of unsolicited advice on how to be a man. This is how a man is. This is how a man acts. And they don't have the opportunity to shine and be who they are and understand that my masculine identity may be very different from my brother and very different from my father or grandfather. And that is as respectable. So questions are designed, whether it's on the survey on the website or questions that I have a different set of, a little bit more detailed set of questionnaires that I have when I work with men, is for me to extract and understand whether he knows truly who he is as a man, not as a person, as a man, because you're obviously your trait as a human being. There are a lot of it shared with me as a woman, and there are some of it specific to you as a man, your masculine identity. So I have seen that men, especially in their 20s, 30s, and even 40s, they are not very comfortable or confident about their masculine identities. There is a persona they put on to fit in and be respected, that they think is expected of them because they were groomed. And that is exhausting. That is so exhausting. And that is what one of the reasons they love talking and opening up, because they're just sick and tired of it. Another thing is a relationship. What is expected? I believe the traditional masculinity has put a lot of unrealistic expectations that may have applied at some point a thousand years ago, or a couple of few hundred years ago, but having the same expectations today as it was back then, while our lifestyles have changed, expectations have changed, what you need to provide as a man has a completely different definition. It's just that is a pressure on top of so many other pressures that may drive a man to his breaking point. There are questions about sex. I always thought as a woman, we are the one who were told to be modest, don't talk about sex, being slut-shamed, and women do a lot of problems with sex. But, and I always thought men are encouraged when it comes to sex. And then they are encouraged as long as it's one type of sex. Very alpha, dominating, domineering, overpowering, very take charge. There's one kind of sex that is glorified, accepted, encouraged, and you can do. But there are so many sexual identities, so many different kinds of proclivities that people have, that men get into lifetime of marriage and they can't tell their wives what is it that they really like, they really want. I've had men in marriages after 30 years, and this is a good marriage, that they told me things that they haven't told their wife. Imagine keeping that kind of intimacy away from your spouse for 30 years.
So what is that? Why do you think we do that, Persia? What is it? When we say, and having filled in your questionnaire earlier today, the pressure of society that you point out, and the idea that society has pushed so much pressure, not just on men, on the female as well. But when we say society, who is it? Who is it predominantly? Are men putting this pressure on men? I've been in sports teams in the past, and the changing room is full of the guys, and there is a certain level, and I think people do put on a certain skin to be around the other guys in certain environments. So it is such a strange thing to apply, that we are applying the pressure to ourselves as well, aren't we, as men?
The pressure is applied by the culture, and you and I both uphold that culture.
Yeah.
I want you to live as a woman. I was told a man has to be a certain way. So I expect you to live up to that. You expect you to live up to that. Your friends want to see you to live up to that because they're trying to live up to that. And if you don't, it makes them uncomfortable.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's a culture. It's a traditional masculinity, aka patriarchy. That is technically, at the root of it, is responsible indirectly, and I have proven it with my research, responsible for such a high suicide rate.
Wow.
In the United States, UK, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, the same. It's amazing how patriarchy can go through different culture and religion and do the same damage.
Wow. So when you're talking to somebody who's, as you said it, in a good marriage, a 30-year marriage, and a gentleman is essentially telling you things about his deepest, most intimate mind, how does he end up there? What is it that's doing that? How does he not be able to communicate that to his wife, who he's in a healthy relationship with? What is it? How is that happening?
Well, the common denominator was the way his father raised him.
Oh.
He could never see his father be the way he wants to be naturally, or have the proclivities that he has. So if he couldn't picture himself as his father, someone, if he likes a certain kind of sex, if he doesn't want to do sports, because usually men your age or even older are raised around the world with very strict stoic fathers, and they can't imagine the values that he has instilled in his son, or father figures, grandfather, and the way they have seen those older men make fun of either a woman or feminize a man that they don't like, they don't think is man enough, and being a woman, because being a woman to them in the culture of patriarchy is inferior. So therefore, being a sissy, a gay, or feminized, or like a woman, they're all insult. So being anything feminine is insult to a man. So whether they were raised and told that way, or they've sat with their fathers and grandfather and they're having a beer or dinner, and father and grandfather makes a comment about neighbor's son who is feminized, that is just instills a deep fear of another man thinking of him that way. So he has no problem because of this attack on masculinity, because whatever he does is an attack on his masculinity, and that has caused so many problems. It's not an attack on him as a human, it's an attack on him as a man. Those are two different things. For men, everything is an attack on your masculinity. For men, you have to prove your masculinity every day. I don't have to prove my femininity to anyone ever. But it can happen that you have to prove your masculinity every single day. And the biggest problem, the common denominator with men, is my favorite subject to address and talk about: insecure masculinity. And what I've done with my research is to help men understand, to separate their masculinity with their nature as a human being. You can be however you want. Your masculinity should not be attacked. It has nothing to do with your masculinity. There are no real men, because then what's the opposite? Unreal men? What is man up? If you don't man up, what are you doing if you don't man up?
Yeah.
What is the opposite of that? Why are we using that? Be a man. Okay, if I feel compelled to tell you be a man, that means what? You were an inferior woman up to this point, and I just reminded you to be a man. Every attack on men is an attack on masculinity. On women, for example, when it comes to sex, it's an attack on my morality. I can be called slut or other words. It's an attack on my morality, on my integrity, but not on my femininity.
Interesting.
So, but for men, it's not just an attack on his integrity, not just morality, it's his essence of a man. And that has caused a lot of insecurity. To prove it every day, to defend it, to link it to outside influences. I've talked to so many men who are very gentle spirits. And when you look at them, they are big, bulky tattoos. They're just trying to prove to themselves that they're a man.
Yeah.
They do extreme sports. They put their lives and their health in danger to prove that I'm a man. And that has caused a level of insecurity in men that is a lot more than women. Of course, we're all insecure. I believe that we're all very secure born, but insecure adults and grown-ups around you completely strip it. But if you're a boy, the insecurity is tied to your masculinity, so you can never get away from it. For example, as a woman, if the insecurity is with the weight, if she loses the weight, that's gone. But with you as a man, because it's tied to your masculinity, it's always with you. So this is the culture we're upholding, all of us.
Where on the timeline, Persia, then, if anthropologically you've looked at this, whereabouts on, and it's interesting that you mentioned China earlier, not that this is linked in any way, but I just watched the new version of Mulan, which is obviously the archetype of the female warrior and breaking all of those ancient Eastern boundaries of the man is a warrior and the lady is matched and she brings honor by marrying a strong man and everything. And it's interesting not to go there right now, but you saying that China is the one that defies this. Now, where on the timeline do you see that this starts to happen? Is it in line, like my instincts, my gut tells me, is it in line with commercialization and advertising and, Edward Bernays in the early days of setting the tone for putting in memes to the culture to create the feeling that we are becoming something that the culture says. Where do you see it that it starts to happen? Where do men start to feel this pressure?
Okay, one quick thing about China. It's not that there's no patriarchy in China. It's just that suicide rate for men is not as high.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But there is patriarchy in China.
Yeah. Well, what I was getting at is from, again, without going too deep yet, I'm sure we'll get to it, but it was interesting just going off the top of my head, having just watched that film today, watching the man is so dominant there. So from what I see anyway, so dominant. And then to think, is that why there is a lesser suicide rate? I don't know.
No, because that is everywhere. And in a lot of places, in a lot of times, it's the household. It's the Latino culture, the machismo culture. They could be even more intense than Chinese, but that's right. That is something else that is preventing maybe some other belief that is preventing Chinese men, and I have no idea why. So I can't get into what I'm not comfortable.
Like you said, you'd have to go and live there.
Yeah, for
literally
years for me to understand, which is interesting. But it's not. Certainly, it's not because they are more dominant than other men. No, I have seen American men, I have seen British men, I've seen other European men, I've seen men in Asia, And by Asia, I mean Southwest Asia, Arabic countries that are extremely dominant, and that's not the case. And
Okay.
it's mostly, unfortunately, there are a lot of stereotyping. I have seen men who are so overpowering and controlling in the United States as much as I've seen in Saudi Arabia. It's not something that really not that as we're not that different as much as we like to think, and as much as media likes to make us believe.
Well, it's nice that you bring it back to media there, because I guess the question I digress from was, where does this start to happen? I mean, I'm currently sort of with my own mental health, my own position of being a man, and I filled the questionnaire in today, and I'm sure you'll come across it, and you maybe have questions for me after, because certain answers I give to questions were kind of open-ended, because I'm at a point in my life where I look at the internet now, I look at social media, I look at the way we're communicating, and we've got so much information, so much vanity, so much to live up to, whether we know it or not, that it feels like that's having a huge effect now. And I wonder, is it on the timeline when the media kicks in, when we do start having, multimedia, television, magazines, all these things, do we see a spike there? Do we start to see it fall apart there?
I wish I could blame it on the media. Media accentuates but doesn't create.
Right.
The problem, media just reflects it, so we see it better. And multimedia reflects it from multiple angles and multiple cultures. But that's not the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the culture we pass down, generation after generation after generation. We tell a lot of men are right now upset with the court system, and when they're getting divorced and custody. And when a child or a boy and a girl are raised in a household that the mom and dad tells the boy to sit and put your foot on the coffee table and watch TV while your sister is with your dad, while your sister and mom are in the kitchen cooking and bringing the food to you and cleaning up after you. That's not where men have issues with sexism. But when the same culture of sexism goes to the court and men are deemed not as good of a parent as a mom, and the custody majority is given to the woman, that's when men have issues with sexism or court system. It's the culture. Media is just showing it to you. It's the culture that we raise our children with. We tell the girl, you're less. Everybody has privilege. And I'm talking about this extensively in my upcoming book. Everybody has privilege. We teach a little girl to hand in your privilege to your brother. He sits, puts his foot up, you go cook, you clean up after. He has more privilege because she just gave up hers, because she was told to. That's what happens. And we don't have problem with that. Men don't have problem with that. But when the same sexism, when men grow older and they have to be the main provider and they have to be responsible for this and that, and there's more pressure on them because they're a man, which makes no sense, then we see that, and we see the lack of balance. And we're all doing this to each other. We're all holding up this culture, most of us ignorantly. We don't know that this is what we're doing. And it's just shining a light on little things and big things that keeps holding up this culture. And when we all know, we put it down. And I tend to use media that can be used in many negative ways, to use media to raise awareness that, hey, men are suffering. They're not allowed to ask for help. They're not allowed to be themselves. They have to wear a mask. Well, before the pandemic, men wore masks forever. Wore a mask in the morning. As you said, that you have to be a certain way in front of your colleagues or in front of your peers. rather. And that is the mask you wear. And you may or may not take that off with your wife or girlfriend, but you probably have to put another lesser series.
Yeah.
You still have to play the man. You can't be who you are, which is a man. If you're a man, you don't have to play a man. So that's the problem. And understanding how are we all contributing to this and how we can stop, which I think feminists for women have done a really good job, although they are being fought tooth and nail every step, raising awareness. We need to do the same for men.
Okay, that's interesting. That's an interesting point of view. So the archetype then in 2020 of a man, describe the archetype that you say the culture sees a man as.
It is the same in 2020 and as it was in 1920 and as it was centuries before. It is the pseudo-alpha stereotype. It's a man who is unemotional, stoic, and that is praised for you to strip yourself from all your natural emotions. It's praised. The only thing that is allowed is anger, which I don't call it emotion. It's a reaction to an unexpressed emotion, which is sadness most of the time. So stoic, never show emotions, don't ask for help, be very dominant, be a protector, be a provider, and basically be everything. Masculinity in that sense is defined as opposite of femininity. So it's denial of anything feminine. So it's a man who is a shell of a human being, who is not allowed so much. And he either takes it out on himself or his spouse or children or another man outside. So that's why we have such a violent, high rate of crime and male incarceration. Because when you don't allow a man to talk, to cry to a little boy, there's not a culture who has not told the little boy, don't cry, men don't cry. We tell a 2-year-old, we tell a 3-year-old, that's how cruel we are. A 3-year-old boy is not a man, is a little kid, he needs to cry. So is a 30-year-old man. But when we I call it in my book emotional castration for men. When we don't allow you to express yourself the way you need to. When we take away your feminine energy, because we're all a combination of masculine and feminine energies. As a woman, I have more feminine energy, and as a man, you have more masculine energy, and that is the difference. But we both have masculine and feminine energies, and a balanced human being is a combination of both. But the stereotype that you were asking is told to deny anything feminine. So is a very unbalanced man.
Do you think the sadness, Persia, do you think that battle that then ensues where the individual, the man, is at odds with himself, do you think that's because there's something intrinsic, there's something in his instincts that he knows he should communicate, he knows he wants to communicate, and many things that he's doing he probably is aware of that, for instance, young guys in the UK for sure anyway, the culture in the playground sort of maybe from secondary school, kind of grade 7, 8, 9, 10 and onwards, you can end up in what I refer to as kind of a wolf pack culture. You and your guys are in a gang and tends to be the most dominant guy in the gang is the toughest guy or the loudest guy, and all of those elements you've spoken of where we are masculine. But I feel like some of the sadness and some of the repercussions that happen are because we must know instinctively and intrinsically that we need to communicate and we want to, and that mask that we keep putting on, we must be aware of it on some level. And it's interesting to me, like I myself, I've been quite lucky. I imagine when we talk about the balance of, I invite my femininity, and I didn't realize it when I was a kid. I was in bands from a young age, from about 13. And I might wear simple example might be like, I might defy like the fashion of the time, or the fashion that's expected from, you know, a footballing young lad from the part of the football team, I guess like a jock, you might say, I think, over in America. And I might, because I was in a band, I might wear like a silk scarf and a crazy different pair of shoes. And then I would risk a lot of backlash from my peers, you know. What you wearing, you faggot? You look like a right whatever. All those nasty. But I was balanced enough to be able to kind of take that and still pursue enough. Now, I don't know if that's because my love for music was enough to get me over the line, or whether I've got a balance. Who knows? And there must be guys out there that obviously are in better balance. But the majority, we seem to be stuck behind that mask. And I feel like we know it. I think a lot of us know it, but it's almost as if the further we go on the journey, the more difficult it becomes to turn around.
So, yeah, you brought up a lot of good points. The wolf pack that you talk about with boys, it's not natural, it's learned behavior. Boys learn at around 9, 10, 11 to start putting a mask on. They're at that age old enough to know what is considered masculine in their society and what it's not. So the mask that grown men put on every morning, they start wearing it at that young age. And it is a learned behavior in their families. And because it's so common, because patriarchy is the same, it's the same kind of virus in every household, they know that, oh, if I act, a boy that is naturally more aggressive is going to take the lead and crush the boy who's naturally more gentle, and not respect him as much because he has seen his mom, dad, grandfather not to do that. So, and all the other boys have seen the same thing. So what that wolf pack is a completely learned behavior and not a natural behavior. And regarding what you did, which was kept your balance, that shows security. Because you said, I'm going to wear the silk scarf, and I know I'm going to be scolded, but I'm strong enough to take it and stick to my identity, who I am. So that shows that you have a lot less insecure masculinity. Your masculinity is more secure than someone who would love to wear that scarf and puts it down because he think he can't handle. So that is, we're all born balanced. We're all born good.
Well, I think it's probably, just to jump in, Persia, quickly, I feel like I must caveat that a little bit, because what I am aware of as I've grown older is I was absolutely a victim of the wolf mentality, and some of my behaviour when I was a young man, because where my school was, my high school, was in between. In the UK, we call them council estates. So in the US, it might be sort of project areas, you know, a much more impoverished area of living. And it was rough. You're right, Aidan? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, and it was rough. And I was absolutely guilty of knowing, and I knew this as a young guy. I was a footballer, I was a sports person, and I was what you might consider reasonably high ranking in the male part of my school, and I was aware, and my behaviour at times was absolutely awful in the way of using that masculinity, using that alpha energy, and as you mentioned a moment ago, maybe crushing the more sensitive person because I was in a situation where we're all there and I want to get those props, I want that affirmation, I want to instill my position. So I had a strange time because I would feel guilty often. So when I was in the kind of the alpha gang, if you like, I was, as I mentioned, I was into my music, I was in bands, I was confident because of that, I guess, to wear what I wanted to wear and be a bit different from the main guys. But then I would also have friends who were the sensitive kids, and in the UK we call them the geeks and the dweebs and and now I'm older, I realize they were just the nice kids who were just, they weren't trying to prove anything or win anything, or, you know, they were just nice kids who had to put up with a barrage of nonsense from people like me at times, who were actually, looking back, insecure and just trying to hold my position. So I needed to get that in there. Sorry to interrupt you, but on reflection of what I'd said, I didn't want it to seem like I'm just some balanced person, because I wasn't. I was rough, and I was on the receiving end of rough, but I was kind of aware of it though. Looking back, I was aware of the mask, and like when I'm with these guys, I'm kind of a bit more macho. And when I'm with these guys, I can let it go a bit, you know, and I can probably just be me more, actually, on reflection, looking at it.
So you're guilty of the same thing that we're all guilty. You were groomed by the same culture. It is easy to look back and say, oh, that was wrong. That was ignorant. That was wrong of me. I have a younger brother, and I was a teenager, and he was probably 5 years old, and he was crying because he had a boo-boo in his hand. And I told him repeatedly that men don't cry, because I had heard other people say it. I was just repeating it ignorantly. As a grown woman, I've apologized to him, but probably the damage that it made at the time, he needs to deal with that, the damage that I caused. So it's easy to look back and say, I did this and I was wrong, because we're all raised with the same culture, more in some households, less in some. So that is something that is on you, as if you're a father, to make sure it's not passed down to the next generation. Your son, teenagers at this time, even with the most aware parents, it still can happen, because it's with other boys and they don't want to stand out. They don't want to be singled out. So it takes a couple of generations for us to be able to reduce those male suicide rates. But it is us realizing how we were groomed by the culture, stop it, and stop grooming our children, or allowing our children to be groomed by their grandparents or uncle, and say, no, this is not how I'm raising my kid. But the fact that you are guilty of, like I am, it's all of us. And that doesn't matter. That life is about evolution. It's not just evolution of Darwinian evolution that we have all come to this far, but in single lifetime, you and I, the point of it, in my opinion, is evolution of mind and spirit. So if we learned a tragic behavior that was abusive to others, working together, understanding and correcting, and moving forward, not allowing ourselves to do that again, not allowing ourselves to seek validation by putting down someone whose masculinity doesn't look like ours. That is what life is about. Not looking back and regretting and blaming, looking forward, how can I make differences, make change, like by what you're doing with your podcast, raising awareness.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely to hear, because in recent years, you know, hence, you know, following pages like yours, reading people like Jordan Peterson in recent years, and various writers, and I guess my podcast was born out of, this podcast, Chew the Chat, is actually born out of my fascination with childhood as a whole, because I think the trajectory, as you've mentioned, things that get said, little granular details of nuance in the society, in the culture of the wider culture, and the culture in the home, they set up so much of the trajectory that we're going to follow, and trauma seems to not be far away from any single human at any point, and however trivial we might think it is. So this podcast has been born out of that. My family broke up when I was young. My mother and father had a divorce, a messy divorce, when I was about 7, and I'm the oldest of 3 at the time, and we were kind of weaponized. The children were weaponized, and looking back, and now looking at my family, my wider family, I can see now, as I've gone soul searching for myself to try and repair myself and find whatever the issues are, just reading, learning, that I look around at that family now, my wider family, my folks and my siblings, and I see the damage. I see it. We're not connected. You know, there's just so much damage that was done in those early days. And I do look back at myself, and as you've just eloquently said, you know, yeah, we do look back, we're all guilty of it, but it's how we evolve and learn those lessons. And now, being a father, I have a stepdaughter who's 20. I've got 3 children, 6, 5 and 3. And one of the most important instincts I have now and feelings is to just create an environment for them that is just an open environment, a balanced environment. And hearing you say the things you've said so far really gives me, you know, a real sense of calm in the world I'm trying to create, because it is so strange to look back on your own mistakes or your own storyline and realize how difficult circumstances are on reflection when you didn't know it at the time. And it's very easy to kind of make sort of justifications, and without knowing it, staying on the path. And that for me, this podcast, as you mentioned, sort of trying to raise awareness, having these kinds of conversations, that's really, really rewarding to hear that. So we'll keep on doing that.
Well, it's my pleasure to be a part of this. I just want to mention one thing when you talk about your children. I think what I'd like to highlight is that fathers have a lot more important job than we originally thought. Usually, culturally, fathers are second adult who goes and gets the diaper and makes the money and helps out. And the main parent is the mother. And that is a very wrong way of looking at the family culture. Fathers have incredibly sensitive job for you to teach your daughter by being in front of her, being vulnerable, by showing emotions. She's not going to, first of all, she's not going to be raised like me to tell her a little boy, men don't cry, tell a 5-year-old boy. And when she is with a man, she's not going to expect him to put a mask on in front of her, because she knows that her father could be gentle and very strong at the same time, could show emotions, but be very secure, masculine man at the same time. And it's breaking these for not just your son, teaching him, breaking, because women, we are under the culture of, obviously, influence of patriarchy as well, which is equally as damaging to us. But that has been talked about thankfully by feminists for a few decades now. But we don't dare to talk about the damage of patriarchy to men, which is literally killing them.
And the reward, you know, when I lay with my daughter, she's 3, she's the youngest. When I lay with her in the evening and we read a book, or I make up a story to tell her, and she cuddles into me, and we, you know, and I can just lose myself in just the moment, and I can be a 3-year-old, and I can be, you know, and I really enjoy that. I love that, just as I did with my boys, just as I did with my stepdaughter many years ago. And it's really rewarding. And coming back around to men and us being stuck in this shadow of ourselves, the rewards that we can get back from opening up, you know, the lines of communication and catharsism that we can create is marvelous. It's really nice when you do actually get something off your chest, or you do have a moment where you lose control and you cry and you realize it's okay, and somebody loves you and somebody cuddles you and somebody guides you. It's really, really rewarding. How do we well, I guess we have covered it in the sense that it's a generational thing, and we have to create those environments one at a time. But how does the culture change, Persia? How do we alter culture?
The most important thing is, which is my biggest project, is to eradicate insecure masculinity. When you just mentioned that when you get something off your chest, or when you do something, you just feel good. Practicing being stoic, practicing stoicism is, I apologize for using this, but that is the best way of saying it, is emotional constipation.
Yep.
So if you walk around 24 hours holding everything like that, that is too much work, too much pressure. And it's eating you up from inside. You think that's stoicism, and there's some kind of honorable BS comes with it. Excuse my language, but it's really isn't. It really, there's nothing honorable. There's nothing good about you holding on and not revealing who you are and not having to show your humanity. So, and that comes from insecure masculinity. So the more we work on ourselves, the more we show our children what does it mean to be a secure man, a secure woman, and we pass that on, and we demonstrate that. When you demonstrate that, other people learn from you. So this is the way that you can use media in a very positive way and have people around the world to watch and listen. And hey, this is what I show. This is how I'm comfortable with being vulnerable. This is where I show you how much more strength it takes to show vulnerability than being stoic and holding everything. That modeling, it doesn't have to take generations. It works right now. A boy somewhere in the world who has stumbled upon your podcast and listens, and you are modeling this when maybe his father is not. And he's searching for something because he knows deep down what his father is doing is not right. But he doesn't know what the right way is. And he stumbles upon your podcast and watches and hears and sees another man with another culture, with another language. But with the masculine part, the human part connects regardless of other differences. And he will change. That is how by spreading it. And that is for right now, for this generation.
That's interesting, because I've had exactly that experience in two slightly different ways, both American podcasts. So obviously there's an enormous podcast from your country that's taken over the world, the Joe Rogan Experience. I started to listen to that podcast. That came into my life just by strange, I can't even remember, but it came into my life in about a year into him doing that podcast, when he was still just in his house, just having open conversations. And what struck me was that I knew Joe Rogan not as a comedian or not from Fear Factor, but I knew him from a commentator from an MMA set up in the UFC. So he's, he works out, and all the archetypes, bald head, tattoos, the whole thing. And the more I listened to him with the various different guests, the more I started to recognize exactly that. Here is a man who is all of the culture's archetypes on the one hand, strong, a hunter, all these things, but then always showing a vulnerability and a sensitivity and a doting father, and a real release of his feminine side all the time, and very balanced with it, and a real kind of impact on me hugely. And at the same time, maybe a little later, I came across a Dr. Christopher Ryan, who's an anthropologist. He wrote a book, Sex at Dawn, which was a bestseller, I think. And he started a podcast. And he's a bit like an uncle figure in a similar way. He's obviously an academic, but he's kind of defied the archetype of that, because he lives in his van for the summers and drives around, does his podcast by literally, he lives in his van. He might drive through Colorado, pull up at a site somewhere or in some place and see some other people and interview these other people, and these wonderful conversations happen. But he talks a lot about what it is to be human, what it is to be a man, what it is to be sensitive. And those two guys, those two podcasts for me, on two levels, changed so much, because the podcast platform itself, or the podcast medium, is so different to, it feels normal now, but at that time it was so different, because it wasn't getting stopped every 15 minutes to give you 4 minutes of advertising and ideas and memes being fired into, that have been absolutely strategy, there's been a strategy to put those adverts on to catch this demographic, to tune whoever's watching to buy this product or think this way. And watching these, as I said, this is a guy in his house with a camera, just chatting for a long time, 2 hours, 3 hours, openly in all areas about everything. And that, as you mentioned, that human feeling, that feeling of like, oh wow, this is real. I can harness this. That was really empowering to me. And as I say, the two guys that I mentioned there in particular had for me that balance. They were sort of allowing me to think, oh, actually, yeah, you can be. I can let that side of me be what it is. It is okay, and really powerful. I think podcasts have been so powerful.
Yeah, and then what you can do for other men, other boys, young men, younger men who are really they just rejecting wearing the masks, but the pressure on them has not changed because the father is still scared, the mother is still scared, the child is rejecting, but the pressure has not changed. So that creates even more pressure. So for them to have a role model, a positive role model to see, hey, it's okay. I can be mom, dad. I'm going to be okay. Let me be. Don't shape my masculinity. Don't tell me what color to wear, what to do, how to act, what to play, what not to do. When we teach a boy that your masculinity doesn't change. You don't need to man up because you're already a man. You don't need to do masculine act. There are no activities that are masculine. Whatever you do becomes a masculine activity because you give identity to the activity. Sports are not masculine activities. Sports are just an activity that boys do more often, or whether they're forced or they're very active and they want to do. But if a man is washing dishes, that washing dishes becomes a masculine activity because he gives masculine identity to the activity. That activity is not given it to him. That is what we need to instill in them, that to reduce that insecure masculinity, that your masculinity, whether you bake a cookie or play sports, your masculinity is going to go up and down, up. And that is the most ridiculous notion. Whatever you do as a man, as a boy, that becomes a masculine activity and done. That's it. So a lot of fathers ask me, what do I do with my son? What activities? I'm like, whatever you do with your son, just because it's you and your son doing it, whatever you're doing, that is a masculine activity. Done. You are the one who's giving it identity, not the other way around. This seems very basic to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, it's a no-brainer, but that's not the case. That is not the case. I have been told stories of men boys or young men being in the kitchen and being beaten the pulp by father's belt because it was in the kitchen.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I have so many of those stories.
Wow.
And
It's almost like the fear, like you said, the fear of breaking the convention. I like the way you put that, in the way that whatever you're doing is masculine because it's you and your boy, whatever you're doing. If mum's gone out shopping and dad says, do you know what would be nice? Let's get the house squared up, boy, for when your mum gets back, and then we can chill out this afternoon. That's really powerful, isn't it? I think
it's security. It's being secure. It's being a man who has multi dimensions as you are naturally, and not being put in a box that the 1, 2, 3. This is all you're allowed to do.
Limited.
What kind of life is that? I have never been limited. Nothing nearly close to that, and I can't even imagine how it is to be a man. And to be honest, I'm glad I'm not. Not just because I enjoy being a woman, because the restrictions, what men have to do is just unimaginable to me. And the restrictions that are on, I'm by no means minimizing the restrictions, the indoctrinations, the pressure that is on women. But we're just talking about that right now.
Of course. And where do you feel like then, Persia, at the moment? Again, I think I probably know the answer, but with social media in particular, I mean, we see lots of statistics and there's lots of data that shows the effect of social media on children as a whole. There's certainly stuff that I've read that seems that it's having a big effect on young ladies, young girls, maybe more so than boys. I watched recently a documentary called Childhood 2.0. I think I saw it on, we'll link it in, Aidan, if you can remember that. But Childhood 2.0 on YouTube, which I found to be fascinating, talking about how young people are obviously literally remapping their social constructs and their cognitive mapping of recognizing each other in groups and in photos and in these kind of peer structures of hierarchy, not just in flesh in the playground or in the classroom, but within the digital realm and in the phones and the expectations. So girls look fantastic in their filtered picture with their good side and all this, and the boys are demanding sort of selfies from girls and this whole internet thing that's playing out for kids. What impacts that having on the masculinity, and what does it, I know we don't want to go into the female side too much and dilute it, but where's that going? Do you worry about that, or where do you sit with that?
I think that's more decline of humanity than anything else.
Right.
Just stripping kids from their identity and their authenticity and their security, and turning them into puppets. That this is how the puppet should look like, and if you don't look like that, here's a filter, so you look like that puppet, so you get likes. And I think that's in general decline of humanity, and that's the scarier and rather bigger topic. And I just think that parents should really limit screen time and no social media accounts for children until they're at least 15, 16.
Wow.
Just give them a good foundation before throwing them into the wolves of social media and internet and this really ugly culture of seeking approval from outside by followers and likes, and just being complete a shell of a human being walking around. How many likes did I get? How many more followers I have compared to you? So I just don't think children should have social media accounts until they're 16. It's not for them.
No, I agree. So you writing a book, Adorable Men. How has that been? How is it going? And I always like to ask that question because, as I mentioned, Dr. Christopher Ryan, he's written a couple of books and he always talks about it as it's such a difficult thing, such a disciplined thing, such a task. So how's it going for you, Persia?
So first of all, we're revamping the website, and hopefully it will be done sometime in December. It proves to be a lot of work, a lot of detailed work. I love paying attention to details. And along with that, the name of the book has changed, evolved. I liked it because we call men protectors, warriors, all of this, but we don't call them adorable, which most men are. And that was just, that was originally the name of the book. But that is the idea of looking at men in a different way, humanizing men. But the name of the book now is The Masculinity Handbook. And the writing is the most cathartic process for me. In 2020, the pandemic just changed plans so much. I have not actually been writing since February. And it feels like a part of me has completely been ignored. So I'm looking forward to early 2020 getting back to writing and finishing it up. And sometime in 2021 for it to come out. It's not a task, it's a pleasure. I love writing and doing that. And it's, to be honest, I'm very proud of it. I think it's going to be a really good book.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it. And a book I read when it came out that had an impact on me in many different ways was 12 Rules for Life, Jordan Peterson. So what do you make of Jordan? Because Jordan touches on the patriarchy obviously a lot. He's been grilled a lot about equal outcome, equal across the board. And he's a very polarizing character. And I'm interested because for me, as a bystander who's absorbing elements of culture and ideas that are resonating within me, I feel like your message, when I hear certain conversations with Jordan, I feel like this message comes through. So where do you stand with his work? And did you read 12 Rules? And, you know, how do you feel about his work?
All I have to say about that is I'm very disappointed in people who have polarizing messages. And tribalism is right now with the current climate, especially United States, but most everywhere, tribalism and polarization and I'm better than you, we versus you, we're the more moral, you have less morality, we're better. I mean, just that is a culture that has been perpetuated even more by social media, by internet and social media, and made it very easy. But it is something in us who want so much, who seeks so much validation from outside of ourselves that whether it's I want to seek superiority over you because of my nationality or my gender or the melanin in my skin, anything that I haven't worked for and anything that I haven't earned, I demand superiority over your group because of that. And polarizing, I think that is extremely unfortunate. My work has showed that people globally, if you just peel a few little layers of the onion, which is the look or the language or the first layer of culture, deep down where all these men, all these human beings are all the same. They have the same pain. They have the same struggles and binding with our humanities and looking at how can I connect with someone so far away that I may not speak their language, I may not understand their folk and their culture, but my humanity connects with his. That is how we can turn around so much problems and so much issues right now that we see with hate, with tribalism, with polarization. So a lot of work in the opposite of that polarization needs to be done.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you see it. It seems to be with social media in particular, and in the UK now, with obviously the pandemic, and obviously with you guys, you've just had a pretty crazy election, and there's all sorts of. I mean, the polarization is off the charts. You know, the tribalism is off the charts, and on top of that, there seems to be folly and manipulation within the channels of how we communicate now, within the Twitters, and as you know, it really is. It's difficult. It's a difficult time. When we see kind of a classic kind of feminist argument on, for instance, a Twitter or a Facebook, do you ever see feminists that are doing work that maybe goes against this message, when sometimes it goes too far in some facets of feminism where the damage is adding to the masculinity issue? Do you ever come across that?
Yes. I'm glad you asked that. I would like to address that. Feminism is very simple. Gender equality. What does that mean? Equal rights and respects for both genders. It's really not even about women. It's about gender equality. And anyone who does not abide by that is not a feminist. It's that simple. I see a lot of these questions asked of me. How about radical feminists who are man-hating? And my answer is that there is no such a thing as radical feminist. If a woman is a man-hater, she's not a feminist. Don't call it radical feminist, because by calling it a radical feminist or modern feminist or this kind of feminist or that kind of feminist, and those are bad, but you're good, because I hear that a lot. We are just helping patriarchy destroy the image of feminism, that there are some bad feminists. No, if they're man-haters, they're not feminists. It's that simple. Why? Because feminism is very simple. Gender equality, equal rights and respects. If you don't do that, don't call yourself a feminist. You're not. I call these people out. I don't call them feminists, radical feminists. Mm-hmm. I call them out. You are not a feminist. You are a coward who is hiding behind feminism to justify your nasty anger. That's it. You're not a feminist by any means. I am a feminist. And I work to promote equality in areas that men don't have for men. Mm-hmm. And I defend women's rights with everything I have, and I always have. Mm-hmm. But my main focus is on men right now, because I don't feel like there's gender equality in some areas for both genders. But a lot of great quality, honest feminists are working on that. And when it came to men's side, I didn't see a lot of work. And the work that I saw was very hostile to women. And that's not going to be conducive. That's to what we need to do. That's not going to be helpful. If you protect men's rights by being nasty to women, that's counterproductive. Mm. So if we want to raise men up, we need to be able to, we can't put women down and ask men to step on them to raise men up. That is not how it works. So for men's rights groups who are extremely hostile to women, or what they call erroneously radical feminists who are hostile to men, those are counterproductive. They're making it worse. Those are not feminists, and those are not helping men's rights. Mm. So these people need to be called out and not be allowed to hide behind men's rights, which is the honorable purpose, or feminism, which is an honorable purpose. Don't hide your nasty anger, hatred behind these titles. So instead of saying, yeah, men's rights groups are this, or radical feminists or that, just call them out. They're not. It's actually that simple.
Right. And do you feel like, is misogyny, is that still a major contributor to the out of balance that we're faced with at the moment? Do we see as much misogyny as we once did?
It's unfortunately case by case. So you can come across a man who is extremely respectful, and you can come across a man that just raises the hair on the back of your neck, how much he hates women. So a lot of time I've talked to men who are misogynists. This is what his dad did. It's a learned behavior. A lot of times it is a personal experience. He was somehow, either if he had a narcissistic mother, if a mother was abusive in some other ways, then he can have a very negative outlook on women. But usually it's because that was the father's outlook, because he was disrespectful, because his favorite pastime was making fun of a weaker, second-class citizen, inferior gender. So a lot of it is, and men think that, like I've talked to a lot of men who say, oh, there are no alpha women, there are no dominant women. And if you are so scared and so weak not to recognize that there are some women who are dominant and alpha and have that same kind of personality, then that is your fear showing up. That you need to be, that all comes back to superiority, which misogyny or misandry or racism is only a symptom of greater superiority complex and problem. So it can come out, if I have a superiority complex, it can come out either through racism or being superior to men or being superior to women or being superior to as an alpha man being superior to more gentlemen and calling them beta in a derogatory manner, beta or submissive. So it's the problem of superiority, unfortunately, that misogyny.
Yeah, we're up against it, aren't we? In times of global uncertainty. For me, as I mentioned earlier in this conversation, Persia, you know, I feel like the internet is, and the way the amount of communication that's happening, there's so much great stuff that's come from the internet, but I feel like on a communicating level, we're putting ideas and shouting our opinions at one another so much more than maybe we're actually living our lives, you know, and we're getting on. I think a lot of us are attaching to ideas, attaching to social media memes, and spending so much time sort of in that tribal battle, as opposed to stopping and looking around in your actual real life and living within that and trying to make that smaller existence better, instead of looking for something more to attach to in this digital realm. I all these podcasts are, you know, I end up in some way or another getting back to this idea, because it's what I'm battling with all the time, which is I need to put my phone down or disconnect from the chamber of, just as you mentioned, the polarizing ideas that seems to be becoming more and more polarized all the time. We can't offend anybody. We can't. The censorship, everything that's happening, we're kind of boxing ourselves into such polarizing moments and not actually spending the time in our lives. And that's something I'm really working on now. And I think if I can get that phone out of my hand a bit and be present in the moment and apply what you've been saying, being present with my children, being aware of them, that's probably the best thing I can do at the moment. And I think probably most of us.
I couldn't agree more. So internet is here to stay. Social media is here to stay. Unkind people are always around. Hatred, unfortunately, is always going to be around. So what are we going to do? How are we going to, in the midst of this madness, what is the best course of action? You are a father. You are working, you have a life, and you would like to understand how to unplug and be with your family. So I am very fortunate to be able to have fathers like you in my community who I'm interviewing right now, and they're working full time. They're living in the same polarized, hectic society as the rest of us, but they find time to few hours a day to spend with their families in a very meaningful, present way. And I'm interviewing them and they're going to be on the page and on the new website starting 2021, telling us their secrets. How do you do that? How are you as a husband, as a father who works full time, is not a stay-at-home father? How do you still find time to make all these memories with your children? Not be online, not just put the phone down and just create these wonderful experiences that so many of them send me videos and show me. So let's, instead of being worried about what are we going to do in this madness, we have this internet, we have this social media. Let's focus our attention instead of allowing it to go 100 different places. Let's find a few communities that are helping to connect us, helping to teach us, helping support us, whether it is emotionally, whether it is with some kinds of education, and let that be an anchor that keeps us from kind of losing our minds. That's what we need. That's how we can harness the positive side of the internet. And I have been asked that, so I'm creating that community, and hopefully it will be ready sometime in 2021. So, and that is an online community. So yes, internet can be draining, polarizing, and it can have a lot of negative, but since it's here to stay, let's see how can we turn it into something positive.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you're creating a community, so the Positive Masculinity Academy, let's tell people a bit about that. So am I right in saying that you're creating, as you mentioned, a community, but also a way of offering some kind of education, some kind of inroads to people to learn ways of implementing all these ideas?
Yes. So I'm creating a community outside social media. So we have the social media pages on Instagram, but and that has been cathartic for me more than anyone else. And I love how people are vulnerable and come, because I thought men talked to me because it was private. But when they come on the page and they say, hey, I was a victim of domestic violence, I was a victim of sexual violence, for the world to see, that was just something unexpected for me, because it wasn't unexpected that they opened up in private, but when they were willing to talk about it in public, that just goes to show how much there's a need for this. So I'm creating this community outside social media. And I think that is a community accessible 24 hours, one for men, one for women separately, because this healing needs to be with peers. The social media is co-ed. It's wonderful. We have the input of both sexes, but I feel like it's best to have two separate communities, one for men, one for women, and allow them to connect. Because a lot of communities for men is around physical fitness or business, or how to get your, entrepreneurship. And those are wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that. But what do you do when you're handed divorce papers? What do you do when your girlfriend breaks up? What do you do when you lose your father? How do you handle those emotions? How do you handle all of that? What do you do when you're faced with child custody court procedures? Having a place to go, to talk to, that not only you get support of your peers, a very supporting, non-judgmental place, but also there's monthly education on these subjects. And there's a library that you can go back to. I think that is something that's very, very, very needed for men.
Oh, absolutely. Fantastic. And we will point people towards your pages, as we always do. I want to say a massive thank you for your time, Persia. You're on New York time. We had a little bit of a situation. Your internet got cut off because you had things happening with windy storms and stuff, but we got there, and we've tried to put this together for a little while, haven't we? And it's happened, and I'm really, really grateful. I can't wait to get this to the Chat listeners. I know we have a lot of young men listening, And I'm really keen for them to get to know your work, and we will point them to the page Positive Masculinity Academy on Instagram. There's a link there within the Instagram to that community you're building with that outside of it. The book then, which was Adorable Men, is now working title of
The Masculinity Handbook.
The Masculinity Handbook, and that's going to be ready. Is that going to be next year, 21?
For sure.
Excellent.
Yes. That is the next big focus after finishing the website. Updating the website sometime in December this month. And hopefully all energy will be focused on finishing the book, publishing that, and creating the communities that I just mentioned.
You're doing a lot of really, really great work, Persia. It really is. We send great thanks from the UK.
Thank you so much for your time, for your podcast, for caring. I'm very grateful to good men like you who are helping other men to reduce the pain globally.
Well, I'm sure you'll read my, like I say, I took the survey earlier, and if you want to come back to me on any of my answers, then I'd love to take this again privately, and we can chat, and I'd love to do that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Persia.
Thank you.
You take care. Thank you.